Welcome to Clothing Culture, a fashion industry podcast at the intersection of technology and innovation. I'm Emily Lane.
And I'm Bret Schnitker. We speak with experts and disruptors who are moving the industry forward
And discuss solutions to real industry challenges.
Clothing Culture is brought to you by Stars Design Group, a global design and production house with more than 30 years of experience.
Welcome to another episode of Clothing Culture. Bret, it seems like we start off so many of our conversations with we live in an unprecedented time. And yet here we are once again. We are starting that way because today, taking a look at things like rising tariffs, supply chain breakdown and increase in costs, inflammatory pressure, which is really stressing this already complicated landscape. Looking at inflation and garment prices, we often talk about the fact that garments really have not risen in price alongside other products with your average rate of inflation.
Yeah, certainly there have been transitory rises and falls. Cotton went through the roof in 07, 08. And I think that apparel producers and brands and retailers alike kind of went through a very challenging period. We're in a complex, business. It's not a small business. Worldwide, it's about 1.9 billion or trillion, 1.9 trillion, my apologies. And the U.S. is about 338 billion of that, still one of the larger consumers, of course, us being a consumer nation. And as you mentioned, we talked about in the past episodes how this has been such a challenging space because unlike other categories that over the years with our kind of typical 2-3% inflation kind of pops, all these other categories have kind of floated up a little bit on inflation. And, the challenge in our industry is that people kind of have this kind of feeling that, prices haven't really changed for quite some years.
And consumers haven't really been prepared for
absolutely not
either.
And, so this year, we started, well, really last year, we started in October, November, a little conversation about, hey, we've got some transitory inflation. It's going to look like 5% as an overall economy. Now it's kind of moved to, is it really transitory? And 5 has kind of moved to 7% inflation overall. We're starting to see, the challenges overall because of all sorts of reasons. And when you break all that down by component, about major industry components, what is the shocking number out of all those, that you look through all the different industries and commodities that people purchase, is that apparel, some estimates are that apparel's up 17%. Whoa. So it's like, hey, there's this massive catch up, over the years. And I think that, when you look at this astounding number that, inflation represents about 7% and apparel's up 17% as overall, you kind of look and think, why is that so uniquely higher than what's happening in inflation? And I think there's just a number of reasons for that you've mentioned a few.
Okay, although I want to dive into that a little bit.
Yeah.
Let's just maybe start with a simpler question, which is, how can brands maybe proactively manage this inflation and still be profitable?
Yeah, I think while there's a lot of headwinds in terms of cost increases that are happening here, there's also some things that are happening from a consumer side that help buffet maybe or buoy some of those pressures that are occurring with increased costs. I think consumers are, certainly with the advent of Amazon, they're choosing convenience, in some cases, over just raw net cost. It's easier to have things delivered. When we look on Amazon and you kind of compare prices, sometimes you'll be like, wow, I'm actually paying more on Amazon than I would if I would walk into a local store. But you know what? It delivers to my door. And so therefore, okay, I'm paying a little bit of a surcharge. We certainly are seeing that in food during COVID. We can go to our neighborhood restaurant but we're going to have it delivered and we're paying surcharges. So there's these kind of things filtering into our system where for convenience sake, we are willing to pay a little bit more. Apparel follows suit. Apparel years ago, pre-COVID, was maybe in the low 20% in terms of online versus brick and mortar. 2025, it's going to be almost half, maybe 40% to half. And so as you move online, there's costs that happen online, and we as consumers know there's those costs. And so you can use some of that to increase some of the cost, the retail prices, to kind of buoy some of the inflationary issues that brands and retailers are experiencing there. And so, that's helpful. The other thing too is that I think it's a good catalyst where, this whole disposable clothing mentality that has existed for years, it's moving us along the path where we think maybe more of clothing as an investment, so we can put more quality into clothing. It's not something that we buy today and throw away tomorrow. And therefore, those conversations with brands clients or retailers clients can be had about, hey, let's invest in things that we're not filling landfills with, we're not ruining our environment, and therefore, stepping into more of a quality conversation. I think on the overall surface level, those are some of the things that brands can weigh in and start having conversations about that mean increased costs to consumers, but consumers are prepared to digest some of those.
One of the things we often talk about are, focusing on those elevated basics and understanding that a consumer is shifting their mindset and maybe investing more into something that they feel will be in their closet for a long time.
Yeah.
Can justify a greater expense. Let's talk a little bit about, product assortment and those kinds of decisions that can help prepare a brand or a company.
Yeah, I think, when I first started buying years and years ago, first thing that I was told, and I think we've talked about in other episodes, but you never buy the right amount. Buyers will either overbuy or underbuy. And so choosing which categories to overbuy and which categories to underbuy in the current environment, I think, is a very important question, or a dialogue, if you will. If we're looking at basics and fashion basics, those are things that we'll repeatedly wear. Like, I have black t-shirts all the time. Everyone's seen those on previous podcasts. Used to be fashion. Now it's probably a little bit of laziness because, I can throw on a t-shirt and not think. We all have certain staples in our wardrobe that are a lot like that. And so as brands focusing on their particular niche, on basics, those are areas where it does make sense in today's environment to overbuy a little bit. Because of our supply chain issues, you can't react as efficiently as you could pre all these issues. And so if you're going to want to be in business, if you're going to want to maximize the opportunities and minimize the risk, increasing your buy in basics or fashion basics is a really good decision today. They're trans-seasonal, they're not kind of fad related, so they're not in one day and out the next. And then making some intentional decisions about underbuying slightly these fashion items on an individual style basis, maybe having a few more, but underbuying the actual quantity creates, one, demand. Two, it minimizes the inventory that, if you have excess inventory in anything that you're forced to mark down because of seasonality or trend that's in and out or whatever, that excess inventory drags down profitability. So if you're eliminating excess inventory that drags down profitability, you're then able to buoy some of the inflationary costs because you're selling out of those items. You're creating this kind of demand in the marketplace for a consumer of a particular brand to step in. There are a number of better brands that this is happening on a daily basis. Our Coulture is sold out all the time. People are waiting in line to get particular items. That has heated up demand. So when something comes out new in some of these brands, people are on it because they can't get it. And I think, that helps a number of items, but it certainly helps in this current inflationary time.
You spoke of kind of underbuying some of those fashion pieces, which makes a lot of sense because from a consumer standpoint, again, you're creating a little bit of demand. If a company is freeing up some of their dollars to buy smaller SKUs or less SKUs and less quantities in that, and then they're selling those through, guess what? I've got fresh new product on a regular basis,
Yeah.
which gives the consumer a reason to come back.
It does. It really does. And it's funny because I think this whole intentionality between buying less quantity of items has happened as a result of this whole COVID thing. I think initially companies panicked to begin with, thinking demand would drop. So they canceled or didn't buy the depth and volume and number of SKUs that they thought because they thought consumers wouldn't buy. Demand didn't end. Demand stayed. So consumers are starting to be retrained today, and it wasn't intentional. It's just like stores are selling out all over. We look and see stocked out shelves. So consumers are starting to be reeducated to the reality or the new reality that if I don't buy the item now, I might not get it. And we're seeing that in terms of the reduction of overall discounting that's occurring on a mass scale. Overall discounting, I think, year over year, it's dropped, up to 10%, where, a certain percentage of the overall economy would discount product. And this year it's way down because demand is there and inventories not in the sufficient quantity to manage demand. So that means that you can sell it at higher prices. There's this whole thing that people don't kind of think about when it comes to, our retail, our cost. If cost is up, we look at the direct kind of result of the retail price that's out there. What people don't go further down the road on is what percentage of my goods am I not selling at retail, but I'm selling at a discounted price up to 50% off. For years, we trained the customer, the retail's the retail. Maybe it's kind of an indicative of value, but if I wait a certain period of time, it's going to go 20% off, 40% off, 50% off. And the actual selling price compared to the cost was where that margin indicator would occur for a brand or a retailer. Today, if less is being marked down and more is being sold at that normal realized retail price, the retail price is more of an indicator of the actual price a consumer will pay. Therefore, as costs increase over here, if the retail is also staying up there higher, you're preserving some of your margin and you can buffet some of that inflationary pressure.
Yeah, I definitely have seen that shift. It's been pretty common knowledge that some retailers, basically plan for that discounted price. It's almost like we've launched and it's already on sale.
Yeah, well, we've over the years that's been a training function. It's been a model certainly for the U.S.
But now with demand exceeding supply, that does give us a chance to compensate.
And we're retraining the consumer. So if we can continue along that education and then further the conversation about, look, we're not filling landfills, we're investing in apparel as a longer term investment as opposed to this disposable thing, I think it's going to help on a lot of fronts.
I think that communication piece to the consumer is really important. You're right. It's training them. It's setting that expectation. It's helping them understand that, the dynamics of the industry. And I think there's from a marketing standpoint, there's some real positive messages that can be shared with the consumer about this shift. It's like you said, we're hopefully reducing wastes and being more intentional about the quality of product that we're creating and creating pieces that are going to become staples and stay in your closet a long time. So I think that there's ways to educate and include the consumer in what's happening and make it a positive part of the story.
Agreed. And I think that, having that conversation, diving into that whole kind of paradigm is a very healthy one. However, making sure that you have a very good planning and numbers department that is managing this new world of, lead time and production, because you still have revenues and margins you've got to deal with. So underbuying wholesale doesn't make sense. You're just going to reduce your overall revenue. But making sure that the balance in your assortment plan is there, making sure that certain areas that you're you're managing those numbers effectively and the assortment so that you're still meeting revenue goals, but you're not having this pressure to mark down or having major overbuys.
Taking a look at that production side of it, are there other decisions that can be made that can really help preserve some of the profitability?
I would say, again, there's all these factors we're talking about that increase inflation, and certainly some of that's transitory. One of the transitory increases that are exacerbating our cost are, we've talked about it ad nauseum and the industry talks about it, but is the whole supply and logistics issues where freight is 10 times the cost that it used to be. I think in time that's going to balance itself out. Like most things, it's never going to become maybe what it used to be, but it's going to balance itself out and be more realistic. And I think that understanding, where you're buying things from, making some decisions geographically where you're buying things from, can help you address filling into different items where your freight times are a little bit closer in. Your factories might produce a little bit, so
looking at nearshoring.
That could be part of that thing that could help, reduce some of the inflationary pressure and also allow you to react a little bit to business. It's just it's become such a complex puzzle today.
Yeah.
Tariffs out of China, again, I get on my soapbox a little bit, but if you ask any economist, tariffs have never worked. The American consumer has always shouldered the burden of tariffs. No foreign country pays for tariffs. That is an increased tax on import, and certainly every brand or retailer or whatever pays that price to import that, and they pass that cost along to the consumer. The consumer's bearing that.
Is that part of that 17% difference that you were talking about?
It certainly is,
industry?
Especially because China is one of our largest trading partners. They have built their economy to supply the world. So if we're going to get into a conversation with a certain country, tariffs are probably not the answer because the consumer pays for that. So there's a lot of pressure with the current administration to reduce tariffs, dump the politics, find other ways to have constructive conversations with the challenges we have with China, and dump the tariffs because the consumer's paying those. So I would say, hopefully that's a transitory conversation. Other countries are just not able to pick up the overall volume that China has built in their ability to provide our industry and others products for the world. So until we can do that, I think tariffs are something that need to be addressed overall, especially in our industry.
Looking at the rise in tariffs, logistics, and, kind of tagging back into the nearshoring conversation, we get questions a lot about U.S. manufacturing. What are your thoughts there?
On a pro, you're employing U.S. people. Perhaps you can turn quickly, you can buy smaller quantities. All of those things kind of help with selling what you have and not overbuying. I think one of the challenges, again, it's this whole supply and demand kind of thing. America abdicated apparel wholesale, in a big scale, many, many years ago.
You mean manufacturing?
Manufacturing, apparel manufacturing, my apologies. And so we have pockets of apparel manufacturing, but those pockets are expensive. We haven't really, to date, in a large scale, employed a lot of technical support, robotic support, things to offset labor cost. So most of my conversations with people that are making goods in the U.S. is, wow, I'm able to do small quantities. I'm able to react to demand. It's made in the USA. That's wonderful. And then you have a conversation about profitability and it's kind of crickets.
Right.
It's expensive. Making in the U.S. is expensive. So, but I believe that, all is not lost. We're going to continue to see evolution in the manufacturing space with technology, that some of that onshoring, much like that's happened with automotives, et cetera, will occur in the apparel space. And certainly a lot of this stuff that's happening worldwide helps to catalyze some of that technology. I always say adversity breeds technology. So, I think that will happen. I don't think we're there yet.
Are there any other thoughts that you have that can help properly prepare some of these leaders in the apparel industry for compensating for that 17%, which is probably only going to continue to increase over the next couple of years? What kind of thoughts and advice would you have?
I think we've talked about most of those conversations through here. Again, there's all these different complexities that all industry levels, leaders or anyone, even startups, understanding which of those components create that inflationary challenge in our industry and understanding which ones are transitory and which ones are kind of permanent. I think that we're seeing massive increases in cotton. Cotton, it's doubled in a year. Cotton will go up and down based upon supply and demand, good harvest, good crops. So that's generally a transitory kind of conversation, something that you might have to weather, make other decisions on different fibers. I think freight and logistics is a transitory issue. I don't think that labor cost is necessarily such a transitory issue. Labor cost has been on the increase for much longer than we've had this kind of current issues, with COVID and everything else and factory productivity. While labor cost is on the increase, the exacerbation to the labor cost exists, and that is transitory, meaning that COVID will hit a particular factory and 30% or 40% efficiency occurs in the factory, or the factory shuts down. That's increasing. The factory has a certain overhead. If you're producing less number of days, the cost is going to go up.
Right.
And so I think that component certainly is transitory. So diving in and really having a conversation about all these different things that are occurring, tariffs, hopefully that's transitory.
Yeah.
Understanding what and creating plans for what is our short-term, medium-term, and long-term goals in our particular brand. What's the customer need to know so that we engage, again, being in the consumer-driven economy. People's ears bleed when we talk about that, but we really drive the point home that it is a change. It is a massive change. So consumers, they want to know. So communicating with the consumers, addressing all these issues, laying in plans that help offset some of those challenges, and then looking at these medium and long-term plans to evolve the organization. Because look, I've been in the industry a long time, and it's almost every so many years I'm just like, holy smoke, what could go next? We're never bored in this industry. And I think, the world always has these interesting, complicated challenges, and we've just been thrown another set of them. I think, creating a plan to insulate yourself a little bit, I would say that the companies with the biggest challenge are the heavy discounters, because those heavy discounters, their costs are up. And if you've educated your price to really inexpensive, there's only so many places you can go. And finally, the net result's going to be a reduction in profitability and quality.
Right.
Many cases discount, organizations don't set super high levels for quality. The customer is not one that wants the garment to last forever or expects the garment to last forever. That's kind of it's kind of that value thing for a particular demographic. But that would be an area I wouldn't want to be in today. That would be a very, very challenging organization. But I think there are a lot of ways that most companies can organize themselves for current conditions and for the future.
It always comes down to numbers. We say it all the time. Have a plan, review the numbers, have realistic expectations on that.
And understand what's going on globally. Really understand what's going on globally.
Read the paper.
Yeah.
Look at industry resources.
Do people read paper anymore? I don't know.
And you know what? You can listen to the podcast because we're always keeping tabs on these things.
Yeah, hopefully we can. It's a lot of complex landscape going on right now.
Absolutely. I look forward to an upcoming episode when we can say we no longer live in a complicated landscape.
Yeah, everything's easy.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, make sure to subscribe to stay apprised of when that episode drops.
Right. As we all moved into the digital space. Yeah.
Thank you for joining us today.